In the early 1800s, one man stood above all of Europe: Napoleon Bonaparte, a military genius who rose from a young Corsican officer to Emperor of the French. Commanded the most dominant army the continent had ever seen, his victories reshaped nations, toppled monarchies, and redrew borders, but the same ambition that built his empire would soon bring it crashing down. By 1812, Napoleon controlled most of Europe through alliances, conquest, and intimidation. Only a few powers remained defiant, and among them, the most critical was Russia. Tensions escalated as Tsar Alexander I withdrew from Napoleon's continental system. An economic blockade against Britain, Napoleon saw this as betrayal. Determined to enforce his will, he launched one of the largest invasions in history, the Russian campaign. More than 600,000 soldiers, drawn from across his empire, marched east. But Russia did not meet them in open battle. Instead, the Russians retreated deeper into their vast territory, burning crops and villages behind them. The French army advanced, but supplies ran thin, morale dropped, and the heat of summer turned to bitter cold. At Borodino, one of the bloodiest battles of the era, Napoleon won a costly victory. Weeks later, he entered Moscow, only to find it abandoned and set ablaze. Without shelter or resources, Napoleon was forced to retreat. The retreat from Russia became a nightmare: freezing temperatures, starvation, disease, and relentless Russian attacks devastated the Grande Armée. By the time Napoleon escaped across the Berezina River, his once mighty force had nearly ceased to exist. Only a small fraction survived the journey home. Europe sensed weakness. Nations long oppressed by Napoleon rose against him. Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia formed a powerful coalition. Napoleon tried to rebuild his armies, but the losses in Russia were impossible to replace in 1813. At the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, Napoleon faced overwhelming forces. After days of fierce fighting, he was defeated. The coalition advanced toward France. By 1814, Allied troops entered Paris. Napoleon's marshals urged him to surrender. With no options left, he abdicated the throne and was exiled to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. Many believed his story was over, but Napoleon was not done. Less than a year later, he escaped Elba and returned to France. In one of the most dramatic comebacks in history, Napoleon marched toward Paris. Royal troops set to arrest him instead joined him. Crowds cheered. The emperor had returned. This period would be known as the 100 Days, but Europe united again, determined to end Napoleon's rule permanently. In June 1815, on the fields of Belgium, the final showdown took place, the Battle of Waterloo. Facing the British under the Duke of Wellington and the rapidly approaching Prussian army under Blücher, Napoleon fought desperately. The battle shifted back and forth throughout the day. Cavalry charges, cannon fire, infantry squares holding firm. But when the Prussians arrived late in the afternoon, Napoleon's fate was sealed. His army broke. Defeat was absolute. Napoleon surrendered and was exiled once more. But this time, the Allies chose carefully. They sent him to Saint Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from Europe. There, isolated and watched constantly, Napoleon spent his final years dictating his memoirs, defending his legacy, and reflecting on the heights he once reached. He died in 1821 at the age of 51. Napoleon's fall was not a single moment, but a chain of events: the impossible campaign in Russia, the united resolve of Europe, the crushing defeat at Waterloo, the long exile far from home. Yet even in defeat, he remained one of history's most influential figures. A man whose ambition shaped a continent, and whose downfall became a lesson in the limits of power. This was the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor who nearly conquered Europe, and whose final defeat changed the world forever.